Come on, demons. Come on, demons. Come on, demons. Come on, come on, come on, come on, demons.
Good evening, Demon fans, and welcome back to the Demonland podcast. My name is Andy, and once again, the Demons didn't miss the opportunity to miss an opportunity. And, we're back out of the eight. So joining me tonight to discuss all this, long-time Demonlander George. Good evening, George. How are you?
Good evening, Andy. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Groundhog Day. Haven't we seen and heard this all before?
Yeah, it's a familiar tune to me. Also joining us tonight is long-time caller to the show, Bim Man. Good evening, Bim Man.
Good evening, Andy. Good evening, Demonlanders. And spring is here, which is fantastic because the spring carnival's underway in the horse racing. And tomorrow, Fee and Stake, there's a horse, a vibe bet, Exasperates running around at 30-1, and that's how I feel at the moment, is pretty exasperated.
We love hearing from Demonlanders. If you would like to join the program tonight to discuss any of the topics that we talk about, give us a call on 03 9016 3666, and I have Skype open, or you can Skype us at Demonland31. If you're listening to the show live, come join us in the chat room. You can ask us a question, post a comment, head over to demonland.com/podcast. If you're listening to the show at your leisure via SoundCloud on demonland.com or via an Apple or an Android podcasting app, give us a subscribe. You'll receive an update when a new show drops. And don't forget to leave us a favourable review, as a couple of you have done in the last couple of weeks. We're also on Spotify and Stitcher. You can get the show that way too. Go to demonland.com to find the links to your preferred method of listening. If you want to follow us on social media, Facebook at facebook.com/Demonland31, Twitter at Demonland, on Instagram at Demonland31, or on YouTube, just search for Demonland Podcast and listen to some of the interviews that we've conducted with current and past players and coaches. If you love chatting about the Ds 24/7 all year round, why not join up to demonland.com and chat with other Ds fans about this great club? Now, with that all out of the way, guys, you can't get much more a Melbourne performance than that. We're in the eight with a game, with a game in hand and we've got a low-ranked side to consolidate our position, and we've got a fit team with a practical full list to choose from, and then we fail to turn up. How frustrating is it for you guys, George? Frustrating. I might have lost George. George, Bim Man, are you there?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. We might have lost George for a sec.
Extraordinarily frustrating, and I guess it begs a bigger question about the club in terms of the sense that this was not a surprise. You hear people in the media say words to the effect that you can't trust Melbourne, and the reason you can't trust Melbourne is because we lose these sorts of games. This is not just a new thing. This is not something that's happened under Goodwin's watch, but it's we'll talk about it a bit more later about what his role in that might be in terms of his responsibility to get his team prepared. But it goes back a long way. There's a long history at the club of losing games that that we just don't turn up for. It's not a new thing, and it's sort of you follow Melbourne long enough and you start to wonder if it's part of the DNA of the footy club to not have the the ability to win the big games, and perhaps it's as simple as not having enough good players in any given team.
I mean, going through Demonland and social media today, it seems it was the common theme running amongst many Demon fans that they just knew, and this was even pre-game, they just knew that this was the type of game that we were going to drop. Nothing has changed. George, you would have welcome back, George. I hope you're back.
I am back.
You certainly wouldn't have been surprised with us, with the way we played. It's such a big game for us. We're in a perfect position to consolidate our position in the 8, and it was such a Melbourne performance. And I was just talking with Bim Man. Neither of us are surprised with what transpired.
Yeah, it was disappointing for everyone. Again, we've seen this all before, all too often, unfortunately, and there were no excuses. Sydney had a 5-day break as well, and we looked lethargic right from the very start across the board. There just wasn't the intensity that was required to win the game, and there aren't any easy beat teams really, apart from Adelaide this year, and we gave them the opportunity early on and failed to capitalise on our opportunities, and we got the result that was sort of expected.
You said we came out of the blocks looking flat, but where's the excuse? Both teams were coming. I'm trying to find an excuse here. Both teams coming off a 5-day break. I believe that the Swans had already spent a few days in Cairns prior to the match, whereas we flew in on the day. How much of it can we pin on the 5-day break and the previous week's game being in the heat of Alice Springs? I guess the Swans made less changes than we did, but looked far fresher and were more switched on than we did. So are we mentally fragile? Can we blame it on the turnaround, the heat of Alice Springs, coming up on the morning of, 5 hours before the game? I believe also last week we finished the game and left straight away and got home at 3 a.m. How much can we blame? Where does the blame lie here? Bin Man, can you work anything out?
Well, I think there's always a challenge with sort of pointing out some of the things around fatigue. We've played at a lot of different grounds in the last 6-7 weeks. We played in Adelaide and Alice Springs, Metricon, which is a 2-hour bus ride. Even the Gabba's a 3-hour round trip back to Maroochydore. We've been, I read that we've played the last 8 games at 8 different venues. Is that something like that?
It sounds right.
There's definitely, the factor of the hub. There's a whole lot of unpredictable issues. Who knows how people recover from the game. We played in the heat. Obviously, the Alice Springs, it was another hot game. All of them are reasons to, not play well, absolutely. Where it becomes problematical is they're not excuses, really, are they? And, maybe some of them might fly against Port, who are flying at that point in time, but we're playing against a team that also had only 5 days and had travelled from Adelaide. But be that as may, a side that we are 14th on the ladder, had only won 4 games coming into that one. We should have been able to play at 70% and still beat them. That was the real concern. Those factors are all real. They're all there. But the best teams win those games when they're not playing well. And look at what Port have done in the last 3-4 weeks. They've won games against similar opposition where they haven't been anywhere near their best, and they've been able to do it, just as Geelong did last week against the Dogs. They were 6 goals down against the Dogs. They came out flatter than we were in this game. Hard to believe, but true. And I was still pretty confident they would get back into that game, Geelong, and they did. They came back from a 6-goal deficit to win because they're a professional outfit with players with really good skills. And I think, it's a big question mark over how well we prepare and how well we are prepared.
George, we were talking before the show just about whether we should have been, hubbing up in Cairns. We're playing there 2 weeks in a row. We've turned up on the day. Obviously, there wasn't a big turnaround. So, what do you think we should have done? Or maybe it wasn't, the choice might not have even been in our hands. I believe we flew up with Freo, who are now hubbing up there. What are your thoughts on all that?
Yeah, I think that's just the reality of the situation. It was beyond our control. coming out of Alice Springs, we had to fly back to Maroochydore because obviously they didn't want St Kilda up in Cairns, who were sharing the plane with us. And then the thing that people don't understand with this whole COVID situation is that the teams are being flown around on charter flights. There's not regular services that are going from Adelaide to Cairns or from Maroochydore to Cairns and things like that. They're just a charter flight that's been already pre-booked by the AFL to move players and officials and even, I'd imagine, media staff and all the other associated people at certain times. Having flown back from Alice Springs and arriving back at 3 a.m, it wouldn't have been practical to come up the next day. People would have been completely and utterly shattered. So a couple of days in Maroochydore would have been the sensible situation to try and get some rest, some recuperation, and then fly up. I think it's probably only about a 2.5 hour flight at the most, up to Cairns, maybe 3 hours. But it's the best, probably the best. Choosing the best option out of a not great option, given that we only had, effectively five days, and with the flights 4.5 days, maybe even 4 days between the travel components. So it's not an excuse. It's simply not an excuse. As Bin Man said, Geelong managed to do it when it's all on the line. We don't seem to be able to do it. And even in this game, despite the fact that we were flat, when we get opportunities and had opportunities to kick straight in front of goal, and I counted at least 5 opportunities inside 30 metres that were either miskicked or stuffed up. Those 5 kicks, if they'd gone through the goal, would have completely reversed the outcome of the game. So it was all in our hands, and we didn't take the opportunity.
Yeah, and the other thing I'd say about preparation is, so all of those factors are real, but I guess those factors, they're known factors. They're not unknown factors. The wind was as soon as I saw it was windy, that concerned me because we simply don't play well in the wind. It's exactly as we talked about in the game against the Dogs. And I think in large part it's because of how poor our kicking technique is. It gets exposed in the wind, but also it requires a subtle adjustment to your game plan. You can't just run with the same game plan. And so a lot of those factors are known coming in. And so the question mark I have is, again, it goes back to Goodwin's role as a coach. And I appreciate it's a contested argument about the role of the coach and what role they play in preparing their players and being ready for a game of football. And I totally acknowledge that, of course, the players have responsibilities. But personally, I'd have it at about a 50-50, 50% the coach's job, 50% of the individual players getting ready. And that's now 3-4 games this season they've turned up not ready to play a game of footy, even with the fatigue, even not on song. If they had been mentally switched on right from the beginning of that game, we would have won it, even if they didn't play that well. But 3 seconds into the game less, Petrarca got the ball from a beautiful tap from Gawn, handballed it to Salem, obviously a set play, and Salem gets run down from behind. That's unforgivable. And again, alarm bells started ringing right there for me, and they never stopped ringing right through the match.
When you go back to selection for this game, did we lose this match at selection table? Obviously, Hibbert out was beyond our control, and that hurt us. What did you think of this? Excuse me, the selections of Joel Smith. Look, they've omitted Vandenberg, Hannon, and they've managed Pickett. Pickett, we were sort of saying maybe he needed a break, but we sort of lacked a bit of pace. Brought back in Fritsch, who obviously was only out because of an indiscretion. But what did you? Bin Man, I might go to you first. Joel Smith, Harms, Neil Bullen, what did you think of the changes we made at selection? Should we have brought in a bit of pace?
Yeah, I actually quite liked. I predicted on Demonland before the game that Smith might go to Papley, and it proved to be the case. And I thought he played pretty reasonably. Actually, Smithy did a good job. If you'd said before that game Papley's not going to kick a goal. You'd be well pleased. And sure, he set up a couple of goals, but Papley's their best footballer.
Yeah.
He's the best footballer in that team, or certainly the most potentially damaging on the scoreboard. He didn't kick a goal. That's the fact in a game we lost. But we didn't have enough pace. Harms looked a million miles off it. I think that was and not only did he look a million miles off it, he was played in a position that he hadn't been playing up forward initially, I think, wasn't he, George?
Yeah.
And he just hadn't, until the end of the game, he redeemed himself slightly. But, we were too big down back. Oscar McDonald had his worst game that I can recall, so that exacerbated it. Tomlinson had to go back. We were too big down there, but as so often is the case this season, it's not the bigs that cause the problem for us. It's the medium and smalls who kick the opposition's goals. And, so again, you question why Lockhart didn't come in, because we had no one on the ground ball gets inside the defensive 50. And, we did look lumbering, didn't we?
I don't know what Lockhart's done not to get a game. He got dropped and he just can't get back in. George, your thoughts on the selections?
I'm not a fan of Smith whatsoever, unfortunately. I don't think he's a backman and never has been. You might remember he kicked 5 goals, I think it was, on one leg at a Casey game
4,
2 years ago. He's got far more opportunity, I think, as a forward than a backman. I don't think he was the right person at all. And Sydney's 2 first goals came from Smith intervening, probably when he shouldn't, and hitting the ball firstly to Papley, and then that finished up in the goal square that resulted in a goal. And the second one was a clean hit straight to a Sydney's player who snapped it. I don't think he's got the necessary defensive mindset. He reminds me very much of Frost and why we got rid of Frost. And I think he completely upset the whole defensive structure with the way that he was playing. It wasn't surprising that he was left on the bench for the whole of the last quarter. I think that in itself was enough to show that the coaching staff also saw the failings of him. The rest of them, supposedly we wanted the pace, the people we put in for pace, A and B, and maybe even Harms and Fritsch, didn't show any of it. No. A and B continually reminds me of the old Jack Tyre saying he's often where the ball isn't. Runs around a lot, doesn't get to contests like he did in 2018, and people still seem to remember this. He just doesn't get to the contest to be able to put the pressure on. Not to the contest as much as the individual players. Fritsch up forward, 0 tackles. He wasn't on his own there, but compared to the previous week when the forward line was putting plenty of pressure on the ball coming out, it was complete chalk and cheese this week. So I don't think the Inns did us any favours whatsoever in what we were trying to change or improve to play against Sydney. And the 4 of them should have been fit and full of run, and that certainly wasn't the case, unfortunately.
Yeah, and the tackling pressure, his pressure was terrible. Melksham's pressure was terrible. There's a leader of the team. Some of the A and B's sort of efforts, his effort was there, I guess, but the number of tackles that they walked through was just ridiculous. Up forward, I thought Spargo worked hard, but again, missed tackles. There was a real lack of pace, but Harms was a concern because you asked the question, well, why was Harms dropped? He was dropped because of his form had been terrible. And I suspect a big factor was his lack of work rate and work ethic in the weeks leading up to being dropped. What did he do to redeem that? Well, he didn't play a game unless I don't know if he played Andy in that scratch game. But if that's the effort he's going to bring back to the team after being dropped, well, I'd drop him and I wouldn't bring him back this season because it just simply wasn't good enough from Harms. And, he's the sort of player that we needed to stand up. And, Wiedemann's got plenty of credit in the bank this year. He's done well, but 2 possessions for a game of football for your key forward isn't good enough, simply not good enough.
Yeah, I don't believe Harms played in the scratch match because he was the carryover. If you remember, before the game, he was was warming up last week. So yeah, go ahead, George.
Yeah, I was just further on the forward line that Fritsch had 0 tackles, Melcham had 0 tackles yet again, and Wiedemann 0 tackles as well. So there's half your forward line failed to put any effort into holding the ball in the forward line. It's not surprising the results that we get, quite frankly, when half of them are just not putting in.
Yeah,
and the other selection I found really perplexing was Jones being selected again, because he looked cooked the previous week. He'd given Goodwin a gilt-edged opportunity to drop him with that. You'd hope it was fatigue related, not just lack of concentration. Whatever the case, he almost cost us the game with that turnover. Played okay in the second half, but he spent time, off the ground with injury last week, coming off missing the game the previous week with awareness, and again looked like he hurt himself, and again did a completely, I think, an even worse mistake. The kick against St Kilda was just a mistake. The decision to not take the shot for goal when we desperately needed a goal and instead try and dinky kick to the pocket and then hit the man on the mark was, if he doesn't get dropped for that, I will be genuinely angry with the selection.
Was he actually off the ground after that? There was a suggestion that actually he'd injured himself, and the reason he kicked it off was because he knew he couldn't kick it.
Well, then he shouldn't have been kicking it then. He should have gone off injured. He should have put his hand up and said, I've hurt myself. Because if he can't kick 40 metres dead in front of the goal, how's he thinks he's going to kick it 20 metres to a guy out which would have put the person on the angle, whoever it was, too. So he did play after that, but he was off the ground for a big chunk of that last quarter.
Yeah, I saw he only had 39%. I wasn't quite sure at what point he was off the ground. That was all.
I think he was pretty much off the ground for the whole last quarter, and that was the second quarter, wasn't it? Was that the second quarter he did that? It was just a terrible decision from an ex-skipper.
It really summed up the night for us when he had that opportunity, and it was a good opportunity to turn the momentum a little bit with a shot on goal, and that was just he lazily turned around, he's kicked it on his non-preferred foot straight into the man on the mark. It's just unforgettable, and I've got the utmost respect for the guy. He's carried the team on his shoulders through some dark times for this club. But I think we have to forget about getting him to 300 as much as I would love to. He absolutely deserves it, but you can't keep playing someone for that reason. And I don't know if I'm just... do you think they're playing him to get him to there? Because I don't think we can afford to do it. And I really hope, I don't know if I'm just being cynical and thinking that way, that's what they're doing. And I really hope they're not, because on form, I don't think he deserves the game.
Sorry, you go, Bear Man.
I was just going to say, on form, you could argue that he's actually not been too bad the last 3 weeks. But your point, Andy, about the selection and the decisions around lack of speed. Well, they went, any side that's got Tomlinson, Brayshaw, Oscar McDonald in it is struggling for speed right there. And if you then add Jones to that mix, that's 4 of your 22 players are genuinely slow footballers by foot. Surely when he's coming off a break, he looked tired last week. He looked knackered. Why? That's the time to rest him, isn't it? Because you want to bring in your fresh players. We've got a full list to choose from. They keep saying, why not bring in a Bedford or an Oscar Baker or a player with some fresh run in their legs or a Hunt? Because, you need some speed, especially against, we knew they were going to pick a young team because they've got 3 or 4 of their more senior players out. So they're a young, fresh, energetic team we're coming up against. Well, why not put your young players in and give them that challenge?
I agree. Big Man, you touched on the wind. We just did not utilise the wind to advantage, whereas, conversely, they did. In the second quarter, we couldn't score against it after they were able to get 2 goals in the first. Ultimately, lost it in the second with those 5 unanswered goals to them. but that third quarter was the nail in the coffin. We spent most of the quarter in attack and managed 1 goal, 3 to their 2 points, so and a net gain of 7 points. A decent side would have had, a 30-point plus gain on the basis of the opportunities that we had, and we just didn't take those opportunities.
They had a player, is it McInerney, the young fella?
Yep.
I don't know it must be his 3rd or 4th game of football.
Yeah,
I reckon he's got a better kicking technique, and I'm not being facetious or making jokes about this. He's a better kick and got a better technique than 35 of our players. He did not look like missing these 2 shots at goals that he had. Luke Parker similarly had a shot from an angle that when he lined up for it, I had no question that he was going to kick it. A sound technique. And we've got I said it against the Dogs, we've just got too many players who aren't up to AFL standard with their kicking, and wind always exacerbates poor technique. And I mean, the game for me was summed up by that miss by Langdon in the last quarter, and then Gawn's effort was laughable. Really, both of them had terrible technique. Both of them were exposed because they weren't confident of getting a kick from a slight angle 30 metres out. And they made us pay at the other end. Our disposal was pretty poor all match, but we missed shots that AFL footballers shouldn't get, and they kicked shots that AFL footballers should get, and that's the difference. There's the 4-goal difference right there.
And we didn't get enough from our forwards. Sydney are a great defensive team. They like to they do what Sydney does best. They clogged up our forward line, but then were able to, once one of them got the ball, they were able to handball it out and just waltzed out of our forward line with little to no pressure. And not just that, I mean, we had so many forward 50 entries. This was like 2019 revisited. I'd love to see some stats on how many games we've lost dominating the forward 50s entries. Once again, we dominated that stat, 45 to 34. Only had the same amount of scoring shots. And we had no crummer in the team, Pickett obviously not in the team, but hasn't been doing it. Spargo has only had a cameo this year for 1 quarter against the Pies. A&B hasn't been able to crumb this year much. We get not much from Fritsch in that, and Melksham. Arguably they're not real crumbers, but once the ball hits the deck, we've just got no one there. And just the quality of our forward 50 entries has just been abysmal. It's pathetic. I mean, it's difficult to tell from watching on TV, whether what's happening with the leads and all that. But it just appears we're just bombing it in. So to me, that tells me we're not getting the leads from our players.
And part of it is like the ability of the players we've got. For me, that we're middle of the table side, and poor conditions expose that. Like it makes it. We're fine if it's perfect conditions. So we've got that talent problem. We've got, as I said, too many players who aren't AFL standard kicks. So we're middle of the table there. I think we're going to have to really address that at the end of the season. And so that might mean some pretty, no one's going to want to hunt, are they? So if we're going to trade in some decent players with skill, we're going to have to be looking at trading a Brayshaw or a Viney, or otherwise there's no value in it. But the other issue, I think, is the game plan, which that's the game plan we've got. They're drilling it in the system, so important. But when the wind's like that, you have to slightly adjust the game plan, and they couldn't. And partly that's a skill, partly that's maybe we haven't been running with that game plan long enough. And partly it's a function, I think, of all the chopping and changing of the lineup that Goodwin's made. It's hard for them to know their roles if they keep taking key players out every week. So I think that those things together, as soon as I saw the wind, it concerned me. And we played stupid football. I think one of the interesting things is they could have thought about is I think we won the toss and we elected to go with the wind. We would have been better off going against the wind, because we were in trouble as soon as we didn't take advantage of that. And we were playing stupid football. If we kicked into the wind, we would have at least been more conscious of moving the ball down forward smart. We wouldn't have been able to just bomb it long. And that's the sort of thing, I think, where maybe that's a bit left field, but that's what Goodwin, if he knows his crew aren't ready, that's a good way to think about a different way of getting them ready. We just didn't take advantage of it, and it was topped off by Brayshaw missing a goal on the siren at the end, albeit from 50 metres. But
I don't think I don't think anyone would not go kicking with the wind. That really is a left field suggestion, but you know what? Stranger things have happened. Go ahead, George.
Yeah, I think Bin Man's right though, in a sense that we not only don't use the wind well, we don't read the wind as well. So if we'd gone against the wind for a start, it would have set in people's mind the way that you should be attacking the forward line. But as we lost that opportunity in the first quarter to take advantage of it, we were always going to be behind. Sadly, I think Brereton in his commentary picked it up pretty well, where he said people, when you're going with the wind, think they're going to be kicking 70 metres out, and that's all we tried to do, kick it 70 metres. But Sydney showed in the second quarter, when they had it, they'd actually dropped it into the hole and out slightly out to the side. That was the smart player movements that enabled them to score quite easily. The other thing that Brereton picked up on, and I don't like to keep pumping his tyres up because I don't think he's much of a commentator, was the lack of pressure right from the very start from Wiedemann. It's all very well, we get the ball in there, but when your main forward's playing against a relative, at that stage, a relatively young fullback, Lloyd was a bit further out, further up the ground. But here was a big opportunity to really make your mark, and he was behind in contest after. And the worst part was he's reverted to style again from last year and the previous year, where if he doesn't get to the contest, he gives up. And it's no surprise that the small forwards can't get anything when your main forward isn't actually bringing the ball to ground in the first place. So we've got some serious problems up there, apart from the continuous story that we keep banging on about the lack of forward pressure. But Brown, I think, showed just being Brown's a simple, straightforward footballer, and he had more tackles, more marks, and more goals than the rest of the forward line. That's a really sad indictment that someone who's 30 years old, rejected by his other club effectively, comes in and can perform consistently. I suspect it's because he's just a straightforward footballer and knows how to read the wind and how the wind affects the play.
Yeah, and on that's an interesting point, George. Wiedemann's other thing that he does, he's done all his career and it waxes and wanes a bit, but it was on full show in this game, is he runs on the ball often. And I don't think it's because he doesn't like the contact from behind, because he seems to attack the ball pretty well in the air. I think it's just that he misreads it. And he time after time yesterday, he ended up underneath the football with the ball going over the top. And, of course, we didn't have anyone over the back. You don't set people up over the back. You set your forwards in front of the pack. And, I think it's a really good point, George, with Brereton's point about dropping it into that hole in front. I mean, again, their goals were Luke Parker, Clark, Hayward, McLean, Rowe Bottom, Lewis Taylor, Sam Wicks. McInerney's a bit taller, isn't he? But, all that's, again, it's the medium and small players that we can't control, and they took advantage of that, and we didn't have anyone playing that role, and we didn't have anyone taking a mark. I don't know how many marks we took inside 50, but I can't imagine it was more than a handful.
Their forward line was also very open, whereas every time I went into our forward line, there were like 50 people in there. It's impossible to sort of get anything happening with that many people around the ball. I was just trying to look to see marks inside 50. It was nine apiece, marks inside 50. So
I'm surprised we got as many as 9.
Yeah.
Well, I guess we did, and then we kicked points with them.
Yes.
That's the difference, isn't it?
It is. Our midfield didn't fire a shot all night. For a team that prides itself on being a contested ball-winning clearance team, we're getting beaten in the middle. It's happening week in, week out. 11-7 in the guts and 29-25 around the ground. On paper, it doesn't look terrible, but when you win the hitouts 38-19, it starts to paint a bit of a different picture. And even if when we did win the clearance, our ball use for the most part was terrible, and they were all of our midfielders were culprits in this respect. George, how'd you just see our midfield game?
Yeah, it was pretty awful, wasn't it? I think it was a real contrast between Sydney's midfield and what Binman was just talking. Or what was it, Binman, or you were talking about the contribution from the smalls and the mids coming up for Sydney, and the complete contrast with the lack of input from our mids. Again, this week we only had one score a goal, which was Brayshaw in the first quarter. Nothing else from the rest. The other thing that I think we have to keep an eye on is Viney. This week, despite the fact that he's at the bottom of every pack, he had 12 possessions in total, which I think last week he was only mid-teens as well. He's just not getting the ball at all, which is a real concern given the time that he spends in the midfield. Maybe an option might be to put him more forward and set an example about how to do some tackling for the forwards for a start, but we're just not getting the value out of having him in the midfield while we're holding others on the outside who could be filling the roles. There's also been a question about Max's direction in terms of the hitouts that he's providing to the players. He's getting the hitouts, but are they actually to advantage or to the benefit of the side? Big question marks on that when you've, I think for the second week in a row, had complete dominance of the hitouts, but not getting the clearances. There's a real non-connection that is occurring around those areas.
The other thing about the mids is they looked dead leg, didn't they? Brayshaw looked slow. Oliver looked like he had no zing out of the pack. Even after half time, he played well. There's no, his effort was there, but he didn't look as if he had energy, and nor did Maxi. I thought Maxi played well too. He put in his usual lion-hearted effort, but he looked sort of tired around the ground. And we talked last week about whether you bring Bruce and Gawn in, and agreed that's probably not likely that they'd do that. But maybe George is right in terms of doing that, or even not playing Gawn in that match. I know that you want him in the team. Hindsight, if we'd lost it, people would have said, well, that's crazy. But, he looked tired. And so that's surely a factor in terms of the midfield not having the dominance that we have when we're up and about.
I was just reading welcome Grapevine in the chat room. Nice to have you back. He says the umps missed it early in the third, but Melksham again ran into the protected space, and he's cost us about 5 kilometres in 50s this season. Couldn't agree more with that, Grapevine. I wanted to talk about our defence. Sort of strange. They moved after half time. They've moved Omac out of defence into the forward line, which was strange. I guess this is more of a in-game coaching move. Then Mays moved back later in the game. What did you, Binman, backline? What was happening there?
Again, one of the things that's always hard with the defence, isn't it, when the ball carrier isn't pressured. And, part of the thing about coming into a game not switched on with the fatigue levels, our game is all about all team defence, everyone running hard. We saw it against St Kilda. Everyone said, great, well done. They really worked hard. They saw the issue that happened against the Dogs, and they addressed it. Well, the very next week, we came out and did an all-team gut run cover. They had a slightly different approach, Sydney, which always worries me when opposition coaches run a slightly different game plan against us, because they have a theory that we just don't do well against them. But when your ball carriers are bringing in it inside 50 with no pressure, you're always going to be in trouble. Oscar McDonald had an absolute nightmare. Tomlinson looked pretty good when he went back. Unlike George, I thought Smith was okay, but I thought he did a pretty good job. I just think that we really missed a small defender back there in Lockhart or a Jetta. They killed us on the ground. Once the ball hit the ground, they got it out the back. So, it's one of those games where sure you can point out the back line, but really the issue is up the ground, not the back line.
George, anything you want to add about our back line?
Yeah, we'll disagree about Smith, but we obviously lost the structure completely there. And I remember seeing Stephen May furious at times because players weren't in position. And those first couple of goals that Sydney got, particularly in that second quarter, were where there was no player within 5 metres of the Sydney player who marked it, not subsequently goaled. Things just weren't working down there, whether it was because we lost Hibbert, who was reliable and knows where to go and when not to go. Oscar, like you said, had a nightmare of a game. I don't think Smith knows how to link in with the rest of the players. He hasn't played in that role for basically the whole season. And a couple of times there we saw last defender, in the space was Langdon, and that's just not what should be. There should be other prime defenders down there in the role. We can't expect Langdon to be coming back trying to be the last man saviour goalkeeper. I think the move to put Oscar up forward was just one of those desperation ones that we had to try something because the forward line was so completely inept. And surprisingly, when we put Stephen May up there, we looked like a forward line again. But that's another story, I think, on its own. But we had too many problems down the back line for a start when that ultimately cost us the game. Hopefully, we get a small back like Lockhart, who's again just a natural, sensible footballer, not trying to do too much and not trying to be spectacular. He just sits in the right spot. Rivers was fantastic. Number of times again that he's in the right spot because I think he's a natural footballer as well. But the back four structure fell apart very quickly in this game.
Yeah, that's a good point. Actually, I've forgotten in the second quarter. I think it was. There was a goal that we gave up where Langdon, you don't see it too often, where exactly as you say, the structure broke down and Langdon was looking around pointing at May and May was sort of just, gesturing as to what the hell happened. And, without putting it on Smith, one of the challenges of moving your back line around and taking key parts, obviously Hibbert was out, but Harms had been playing there all season and we took him out. Is that, when you're playing a zone defence, is everyone's got to know where they've got to be. And clearly there were 3-4 times where people weren't where they were supposed to be, and you could tell that by the way they were pointing at each other. And when it happens to other teams, I remember Hawthorn, something similar happened to them when we were playing them. It looks terrible, doesn't it? The body language looks terrible, but of course, on both of those occasions, they made us pay and kick the goal. I think one of them was the young kid, who kicked it from an angle.
Yeah, when you bring up Langdon, that did happen a few times to him, but he shouldn't be the one back there. So I don't know what happened there. Anyway, I think I'm at the end of my notes. My last thing that I wrote down was Langdon was the best for us, despite the costly misses. The rest, a couple of had pass marks, Brown, Tomlinson, Gawn, May. The rest missing in action is all I wrote. So I don't know. Is there anything else about this particular game you guys want to bring up? Because I'm all out.
Do we?
3183D in the chat mentions leadership, and I reckon it's a huge issue for the club. Has been for a long time. Stephen May brings it. He makes his teammates accountable. He makes it clear when he's angry. I mean, remember the hullabaloo last year when he on field criticised Frost, but that's you look through that at a different lens now. The question mark in that game is if it was Geelong. If that was Geelong playing the Swans in that game and they had to win that game, you just know that Dangerfield would stand up. You just know that Selwood would stand up. You just know that Ablett, even if he was half injured, would stand up. You just know Hawkins would go back and kick that goal from a difficult angle, or one of their mids, or you just or Duncan, or you just know that one of the leaders, multiple leaders, would stand up and do it. And the question I'd be having if I was Goody is, which of you stood up yesterday? I mean, Gawn tried, but Petrarca looked out on his legs. Jones and Melksham, they're the senior players. Melksham did his disappearing act again. Jones made a couple of stupid decisions. That's the a big issue for the footy club. You don't win those games without leaders standing up, and sometimes that's just what it takes, like the previous week with May standing up. So, that's a huge issue for the Ds, I reckon.
100% right. Good point. 3183D. George, anything else on this game before we move on?
No, we want to forget about it as quickly as possible.
That's what I'm trying to do. So
I'll just say one more thing only about this game in terms of the pattern, and that's the question mark still that I went back to before about Goodwin and his ability to get us up for these big games. So, that one is as big a game as when they beat us in 2018 at the end of the season that you mentioned last week. And hopefully not quite as big because of, we're still a chance of making the finals. But if we don't, we will be able to sheet at home to this game. But similarly, the last round of the season in 2017, when we failed to beat an equally poor Collingwood to make the finals that year. I mean, that's 3 big games where, for whatever reason, whatever the background is for the players being fatigued and all of those external factors, that the fact remains is that the Melbourne Footy Club haven't been mentally switched on in games that are must-win games. And so that's 3. That's a pattern that's building. Coaches and everything, but that's a pretty serious blot on his copybook, I think.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. Look, there's a lot of factors involved. Look, it all depends on what ends up happening this year, whether we make the finals or not. But then there's all the financial issues, COVID issues, the fact that, they can trot out excuses if they want. Be interesting to see what Glenn Bartlett says in the coming weeks, depending on what happens. But supporters are frustrated. You can see we've got a thread on Demonland that just keeps called is Goody the right guy, and that just every time we have a loss, that gets a lot of traction. So it's certainly going to be interesting. But it just seems we just, as you said, we don't turn up for these games, and supporters are losing patience. They just can't keep happening.
Just on a practical level, there was a great post from someone today, and I apologise, I can't recall the poster's name, who said that he's a member, long-term member, and he called the club today to say that, I think from what I understand from what he wrote, that he must be on a higher membership rate, and that he wasn't stopping his membership, but that for next year he must be on an automatic debit, and he wanted to bring his debit down to a normal membership. And said that the person who took the call said they had dozens of people calling already that day to either cancel their membership or stop the automatic payment. Said the woman was a Melbourne fan and a member, was upset and understood. But I think that's the it in a nutshell. At a time when you can't afford to lose members, to have dozens of people calling up and stopping their membership. I mean, he also said that Pert gets a report on that every day. And so it goes without saying there's pressure building, deservedly so.
That's very interesting, considering we were one of the clubs that they highlighted, saying that we had the least amount of people cancelling their memberships as a result of us not getting any value this year out of our memberships, or very little value. And I'm not talking about the game results.
What COVID could do to the club, Melbourne footy players have done to the club.
Well, that's exactly right. That's very telling. And if people are going to be not necessarily cancelling their memberships, but saying, hey, you're not getting a direct debit out of me, and I'm going to wait a couple of rounds into next year before I re-up, that's already when people have got their own hardships financially. That's very worrying. So, but that'll be interesting. I did see something on social media. Someone had posted on Facebook an email that they wrote to Glenn Bartlett and then copied the reply that they received, and he was going to give them a personal call back. We've got a call on the line. Hold on one sec. Good evening. Welcome to the Demonland podcast. Who am I talking to?
You're talking with Grapevine.
Oh, Grapevine. Very nice to hear your voice. Welcome back to the Demonland.
Good evening, George and Binman and all the Demonlanders out there.
Very, very nice to hear your voice, and welcome back to the Demonland podcast.
I wish I was back under better circumstances, but unfortunately that's our lot in life. I just wanted to say one thing while you're wrapping up the Swans game, and I know that you guys mentioned it, and there was quite a bit of talk about it in the post-match thread, and that's the criticism of Max and Langers at the end for missing their late shots. I mean, the key, the trick to all that is to not be 4 goals down with 10 minutes to go when you're kicking into a wind in the wet. Under those circumstances, you need absolutely everything to go right. And 99.99% of the time, it's not going to happen. There's going to be an errant kick along the way, whether it's goal or while you're going forward. So I just thought it was a bit harsh, particularly on Langdon, given the game that he played, and Max was pretty good too, for sort of people to be putting the blame on that at the end.
Yep, fair point. I certainly wasn't putting any blame on them, but I know that there were some people online today.
I think it's a fair point, Greg. It's still, nonetheless, we had a chance. Your point's spot on, but you kick that goal, we do go to 8 points. If Langdon kicked that goal, we were only 8 points down with full 4.5 minutes to go at that stage with what momentum there was. Of course, you're right. We missed plenty of easy ones before that, but that was dead straight from 30 metres out. Not that he played great games, so did Maxi. Maxi's was neither here nor there to an extent because we weren't really going to be in it after. But if Langdon kicks that goal, we're 8 or 9 points down with 4.5 minutes to go and a big chance of winning it. And sometimes you've just got to set those games out of the fire if you can.
Yeah, I mean, look, there was still plenty of time, as you say, had he kicked it. But yeah, look, the week before against the Saints, we had our kicking boots on and couldn't miss. And here it was it was the opposite. Brayshaw should have nailed his on quarter time, and Mitch Brown should have nailed his first shot on goal too. We kicked very poorly with the wind.
Totally. But the difference to last week was, and it goes for me back to technique, last week the conditions were apparently absolutely breathless. There was not a wind, not a zephyr. This week it was windy, and it's just poor technique. It's exposed. Langdon has got poor technique. Gordon, of course, has got terrible technique. I was not surprised either missed it because of that factor. And, you can't fix poor technique, unfortunately, or you can't do much to fix it.
He gets away with it because he's able to find so much space that most of the time he's kicking without any pressure at all. So he's able to get by most of the time. But you wouldn't want to be relying on him to win you a game off his boot after the siren.
No,
you make an excellent point about those two. It is a bit unfair for them getting heat because Langdon was fantastic in that game. I mean, he didn't leave anything out there, did he? He just ran all game, and nor did Maxi. Maxi wasn't as impactful as he has been, but, geez, you couldn't knock his effort, and there are plenty of players in that team whose effort you could knock.
Look, I don't think you can blame those misses when we're playing catch-up football. I think the blame's got to be in those 5 unanswered goals. And it's happened a few weeks in a row. We've had lots of 3, 4, 5 sets of unanswered goals, and that's when it kills you. You can't be 5 goals down and then complain later when a couple of guys miss it to not get you within 9 points. The damage is already done. And
that's where the comment about the leadership rings so true, because that's where your leaders also need to step up to arrest the momentum. When a team kicks 5 in a row, that just shouldn't happen. There needs to be a go-to way to a circuit breaker there, and often in good teams, it's that 2 or 3 leaders step up at that vital time to stop the momentum travelling all one way. And under Goodwin's tenure, there's been any number of games where the opposition have kicked 4 or 5 goals in a row, and it really shouldn't happen.
Yeah, by now they really should have something sorted. It happens once, happens twice, but, there's half a dozen games that's happened to us in over the last 12 months, so not good enough.
No, certainly not. Well, moving on from this game, I guess let's focus on what have we got? 3 days from now, 4 days from now. What is it? Friday today. We're playing on Monday. Changes coming up.
We're probably already on the bus to get to the airport to take our boat to our next match. So the travel started.
So we're still in. I hope we're still in Cairns. Are we?
We are.
Yes.
Okay. Yes. So. Do we know, did they bring the whole team over? Do we have a choice of players to pick from? Does anyone know who came over? I assume it's no.
That's a good question. I don't know, but even when we played in Adelaide, they sort of had half a dozen extra players that we saw in the rooms. So I'd imagine it'd be similar for up there as well. You really couldn't take only 22 or even 24 up when you're going to be there for 2 weeks or 10 days. We've got some injury. Look, there's was Brayshaw confirmed to be injured? He's looked like he did something to his ankle. So I'm not sure. Yeah, his was an ankle, and he did come back on in the last quarter. Certainly, he was on the ground in the last quarter. But you after 3 days, you do have to worry whether the swelling's gone down. He's obviously gone down to the room and had a jab in it to make him feel good for the time being. But is there any real damage down there? We don't know. Jones, I suspect, has done a quad. Which I think would put him out for 4 weeks at least. So we'll need a necessary change there. Is Hibbert available this week after another 5 days? We hope so, but it's another question mark there. Don't know about those are the injuries components. So I think we've got more problems with the heart muscles on the on the field than the sore legs.
Grapevine, what changes are you making this week?
Well, Cozzy Pickett has to come back into the side. We certainly missed him, although I think he had to miss because he looked tired the week before. Look, I'd be very tempted to bring Harley Bennell back, even though I think there are question marks on his defensive efforts. I'd be very tempted to inject his skill into the forward line and his pace too. I was surprised that Lockhart wasn't back in the team already for yesterday's match. And I think, look, the other one probably for mine is whether Tom McDonald comes back in at Brown's expense. The forward line mix isn't right at the moment. I don't think Melksham and Fritsch and Wiedemann all work well together. I think there's just not enough defensive stuff going on. Having said that, I can't really see either of those two players being dropped. And if it did come down to them, well, if Fritsch was kicking straight, it wouldn't be a discussion at all. Melksham would be out of the team in a heartbeat. Fritsch just has been kicking poorly all year for some reason, so his value really diminishes with that poor finishing.
Yeah, I don't know what happened to him. He was such a straight kick. He was one of the guys you'd want ball in hand, and now you don't want him anywhere near it. in terms of set shots. Bin Man.
Yeah, I mean, one thing if you look back, I'd love to know how many players we've picked this season. We've had a full list to choose from. And right from the restart, the game against Carlton, it's been the merry-go-round of players in and out. And we were talking a couple of weeks ago about, I think it was 15 players through our forward line. Well, now we've got a couple more through there. We're talking about changes into I totally agree with Grapevine. There's that sort of combination doesn't seem to be working, and at least part of that's because of it's got to be synergy. They've got to know where the spaces, and I actually think a big problem has been, we've maybe not surprisingly, but we've really missed Jackson. Jackson and Wiedemann were seemingly starting to get a really good sense of where each other were. Jackson's mobility's been really lacked, and also he was applying pressure inside 50. But Melksham not only is not applying pressure inside 50, he's no good for a contested mark, and a player his size should be taking his fair share of contested marks. He just doesn't take anything overhead anymore, and he's not tackling, nor is Fritsch. Fritsch is not taking his marks either. So it's really hard to know, that forward line, but it just seems there's been so few weeks where there's been no changes. And, again, they're going to have to make changes. Again, they're under pressure. Cozzy probably could have done with another week, another game, I should say, off. But, they probably are going to have to bring him back in, which is, what does that say about where we're at, that it's important that you bring a kid back who's in his first season of footy. He's only 18 still, I guess, or 19. So, it's really sort of a discombobulating season in many ways, but it's not been helped by the selection rotation that just seems never to stop.
Yeah, well, the compressed fixture hasn't helped. The flying all over the country. How many times do we usually fly interstate? It's 5 or 6 times a year. The travelling to and from, usually it's 20 minutes, half an hour for the guys to get to the G, and now we're travelling 2 hour, 4 hour round trips, 3 hour round trips. It's a lot of factors, and that would contribute as well to the unsettled team. But then again, almost all the teams are in the same boat.
And other teams don't have the good run with injuries that we've had.
True.
Yep.
What changes would you make, Andy?
I have no idea, because every time I think I've nailed it. If it was up to me, there'd probably be about 10 changes this week, and that's not going to happen. I'd like to bring in some leg speed. I think we've had a few players who have been a bit unlucky not to get selected, but then again, we're making. If you go by some of I want Bedford in, I want Bennell in, I want Lockhart in, but then we're making another 5 or 6 changes, and I think there are guys that are getting games without earning it. I think Melksham's been pretty poor this year. I don't know how Jones was getting a couple of games, but I'm not the coach, so yeah.
I think, Oscar McDonald will get dropped, I think, probably, and Tomlinson will then have to go back, and I don't think he's good deep, but they don't freeze up space on the wing for Oscar Baker potentially to come in. Jones will definitely go out. Well, not definitely. I think he should go out, but that injury might take that off the table as an option. But yeah, also Bedford, you've got to wonder where Hunt's at in his career if he can't crack it into this side at the moment either.
Do we bring Vandenberg back?
I was going to say that I bet you Vandenberg will be brought back, and I don't think that he's the answer, or is not quite what we need at the moment, even though he does, bring certain qualities. But I'd be betting my money that he will return.
B-Man, you're good with opposition analysis. What do we need to? What are your concerns with Fremantle?
Well, actually, as I've said a few times, I have a developing theory that we don't do well against teams that have a different game plan or a sort of radically different game plan, and Swans do. And so I think it was part of the problem. We looked a little bit, our structure looked a bit out, and partly because it doesn't sort of match up well. St Kilda's the opposite, Collingwood's the opposite, well, not opposite game plan. We have a similar game plan, similar structure. We have a very similar structure to Freo. Freo are playing straight out of the Ross Lyon, Ruse sort of game plan of defence first. They're very zone heavy, like their zones are even more defensive than ours. And, all season, they're at the stage where new coach Longmuir's trying to drill in a system to them. And so they're not allowed to go from that system. There's no, they're really looking to build that system out. So I think that the matchup is really good in terms of two systems. So I think that will be okay in terms of our structure. But again, if it's windy, we'll struggle. I'm not going to make any predictions about how this game's going to go. Apart from the likelihood Hogan will line up and kick 6 goals on us and, probably beat us with a kick after the siren. But apart from that, I'm fairly confident.
I watched Freo the other day, and Jesse was playing up the ground, more at centre half forward, and doing his usual good running, and took a number of good marks actually. Really worked himself into the game as it went on. So he might be hitting his straps after a pretty indifferent and injured period for him.
If I was coaching, I would tell the Melbourne, and we will not do this because it's not our style. I'd be getting the Melbourne players and just be roughing him up, all just giving it to him all night. But we won't do that. Just get into his head.
The real risk of this game is that if we don't bring the required gut running to play our system, they will. They absolutely will. They were the game, I forget 2 weeks ago who they played, but they stayed in the game the whole way. The game, I watched them play Sydney, and it was the most boring, dull game you'd ever want to see, but they worked the whole game. They just ran and ran and ran. And if we don't do that level of running, they'll beat us. Pretty much everyone will, because we don't have that ability to win the games, just on our talent like Richmond does, or the sort of strength of their system can roll over teams. So if we don't bring that running, and if we can't, then we're in trouble, like from fatigue, because they're fit, and Longmuir's got a good system, albeit a sort of pretty low-scoring, dull one.
Yeah, well, they kicked 4 goals the other night. They've been producing some pretty low scores. Our run home, it's the equation sort of simple, I think. We've got the percentage over the Bulldogs. So if we go win for win, win for win with them, we should finish above them. And if we beat GWS, we've got a better percentage over them. So 3 wins, we make the finals. I don't believe anyone else can overtake us if we win all 3. So our destiny is in our own hands. So we need the 3 wins. I think if we lose to GWS, I don't think we can make it. So the equation's extremely simple. Personally, I don't know if we're going to win another game for the rest of the year, but that could be my MFC SS. Graveviney, can we make it?
Well, as you say, we can. I don't think we will.
Yes.
I was actually quite confident going into the Swans game. I thought we were going to put in a sort of a professional, mature performance, if you like, but obviously that didn't happen. And I just think that with these shortened breaks between games, there's just too much left to other factors going on at the moment, and I don't think we'll get it together to win all 3.
George?
We'll drop one probably to the Giants.
Well, if that's the one we drop, that's curtains. George? not can we, because we obviously mathematically we can. Will we?
Will we? That's an easy one. We'll save it up to the last game and lose.
That's the most Melbourne outcome there could be. That is 2017 all over again, where we do the job over. Obviously beat Fremantle and do the job on GWS to set us up where we just need to win to be in. And the AFL will probably schedule that game for the last one of the round. And just watch us fall to pieces against Essendon, who won't be playing for anything likely. They're out of it. Very Melbourne. Bin man.
Yeah, what will happen is that we'll definitely beat Freo, we'll definitely beat GWS, and then we will play Essendon as the very last game of the round. Just prior to that, because they are out of it, half their team will get out on the tear and get done for a COVID breach. So they'll have to bring in they'll play every one of their last bootstrapper and have the worst team possible, yet will still be beaten by them by a kick after the siren. That's how I see it playing out.
Well, we've done that against Essendon once before, where we lost to a second string team.
It's like a VFL team, not even.
Was it West Coast and Adelaide that we had to watch in 2017?
Yes, well, that's what I was going to say. And so that was Adelaide were top of the ladder. They were over in Perth, but they were a better team than West Coast, and then they lost to the Eagles. Because they didn't need to win. They had top spots secured, I think. Yes, they did.
If I remember correctly.
They did. And so what I can actually see happening as well is maybe we do what we said, beat Freo, beat GWS, and then lose to Essendon, but then maybe have to wait for the Giants St Kilda game to be played out.
And that one, that's more Melbourne. After watching the Melbourne game, I sort of was in a bit of a daze and watched the part of the Carlton GWS game and just found myself sort of numbly willing Carlton to win.
Well, that would have been a good result.
Point after point. It was like some sort of weird water torture.
That actually, we needed Carlton to win that because that would have kept us in the 8 for the moment and kept our percentage sort of in play against the Giants, even if we lost to them. So, yeah. There we go. That's the run home, boys. Anything else you want to talk about? Anyone know of any good kebab places where I can get a kebab tonight?
Yeah, the Richmond players know where there's a couple. I've got some.
Go ahead. You go ahead.
Yeah, I've got some news for Bin Man. I'm reading the forecast from the Bureau of Met site for Monday. Partly cloudy, medium, 50% chance of showers. Winds southeasterly, 15 to 20 kilometres an hour, increasing to 25 to 40 kilometres an hour during the morning, which means they'll still be around at night.
Right, wet and windy.
Wet and windy.
Perfect storm for the Ds. Just on that Richmond thing, Grapevine, you'd be familiar with Orchard Avenue where this occurred. No, not necessarily the venue that occurred, but the actual location.
Andy's right. We've both been in surface and together at the same time, and not much good happens. It's a pretty small strip of turf in Australia, the Orchard Avenue in Surfers Paradise, but a fair bit goes on in that place, and not too much of it is good.
Into where it actually happened, 2 doors down from that's where the police station actually is.
That's right.
It's like right there. Couldn't have chosen a worse place to have a punch on if you want to stay out of trouble.
And indeed a restaurant that you and I used to dine at quite regularly too, Andy.
Yeah,
so,
a few doors down as well, yeah.
There you go.
I read an article about it just before the show started. I had to laugh. They've gone out, kicked out of the gentlemen's club.
Oh, so they were they kicked out of there?
That's what it said in the article.
Yeah.
They were kicked out of the gentlemen's club. They've stumbled to the kebab shop. Some fellas come up to them and started a fight and jumped into one of them. They bought their kebabs. I don't know why this is relevant, but the card was declined. It said in the article.
Yes.
And had to be used by some other pay method. I have no idea why that's relevant to the story, but there you go.
The story said...
They buy the kebabs, they get in the fight. They then, as the story goes, buy 2 more kebabs.
Yeah, because apparently their kebabs were destroyed in the fracas. They then bought, but yeah, when you talked about the FPOS was declined, and one of the articles I read or one of the posts on Twitter that I read said that he did a direct transfer to the guy in the kebab shop to pay for it. That way. So
that's brilliant report. They can't get the COVID reporting right, but they can be that specific about what occurred around the kebabs. So if they got $100,000 fine for kebabs, that's $25,000 a kebab.
Yeah, it's not a cheap night out. It's what do you think of the penalty for that? Considering it could have derailed the whole season. I believe that Richmond is going to make them pay, the 2 players pay for that $75,000 fine because it apparently comes out of their soft cap or something like that, and that could potentially mean that they have one less staff member next year, one staff or coach or whatever. But Richmond are going to make them. But I think they should have premiership points on the line. Maybe not for this, the first, second, maybe the third infringement. But I think just a fine to the club's probably not enough to get through to some of these players. Perhaps there has to be something a bit harsher. Go ahead,
Wouldn't you love his job as a football manager for a football club? How many times have these guys been warned, and there's been the example set not only within their own club but at other clubs as well about what the expectations are, and they still go out and do it.
Can you imagine what it's like when the phone rings at 1:30 in the morning and you think, this can only be bad news.
There's no good time of the night. There's no good phone calls at 3 in the morning.
No,
but that was 3:30 in the morning.
But what's
3:30? Yeah.
What's the hub situation? I thought they weren't allowed to leave the hubs. Obviously, you see them playing golf or maybe going to the beach. But what's the...
That same article said they got on the Terps at a quote-unquote AL and club event at the hub. Went back to their room, presumably a shared room, kept drinking, and then called an Uber to go to Orchard Avenue, which sounds pretty harmless sort of name for a street. So, no, they're not allowed to leave the hub. Was or I think they are, but not to particular venues or after particular times.
Yeah, I was going to say there's a curfew for the. There's got to be. You got to have some control, and there's got to be a curfew because nothing good can happen at that time of night. So, here's a strange one. Grapevine, you'll be still with me. I'm connecting with these guys through a different method. We're not using Skype at the moment. We're using another program, and I've been dumped out of it. Not sure why.
Oh, right.
So it's just me and you while I read. Oh, there you go. There you guys are back. I got booted out of this session, but we're back.
And you're not recording.
Oh yeah,
Yep.
That's right. I'll have to do a lot of stitching together later. If this is going to be a headache, then we might be going back to our previous method. All right, we might...
the final thing about that Richmond thing, They've had a disastrous off-season. They've done pretty well to be doing so well on the ladder. And I thought I heard that Baum had left the club. Is that right?
I think he's still at the club. He's not up in the hub with them.
Right.
But I had someone did say something on Demonland that he would be leaving at year's end, but I haven't heard anything about that officially.
I mean, they've done well to do well on field, given all of the off-field distractions they've had. It's just been one sort of sideshow after another, hasn't it?
Yeah, but they're still in the mix, and they're the type of team that can still win a premiership, given all that. I'd rather be them than us at the moment, and their ladder position than us at the moment.
It's interesting, though, isn't it, the way that the commentary then turns out? Because I saw someone say a couple of weeks ago that Buckley's infringement in playing tennis has impacted on Collingwood, and I note that they're just about to go down to Brisbane tonight. And so that's been explained as part of the reason there, and yet Richmond have defied supposedly all the other off-field distractions that they've had to still be going all right. So doesn't seem to be a factor there.
There goes my KO experience.
Gravani just spoiled the game.
Replay of that game.
Well, it's close. It's close enough, actually. Game on.
All right. Well,
It is still close enough.
Well, not everywhere in Melbourne.
No, it'd be all over.
As long as they're not relying on Langdon to kick the winning goal. They are actually forward in Collingwood, so it is indeed game on.
All right.
Anyway.
All right. Well, thank you, Grapeviney, for joining us tonight to give your
Thank you for having me back.
No, of course. Anytime you want to join us, you're very welcome.
I've got to say, look, it's been strange to be on the subs bench while Binman's been in the seat, but look, prior to the Swans game, Binman had a very good record since returning to the podcast. I think, 4 wins out of 5. So he was back in 2018 form. So not surprised that he's continued on.
Yeah, for a few weeks we were putting up the pretense that he was still just a caller who happened to just be calling throughout the whole show just to try and fool the Norm Smith curse that sort of hangs around us like a bad smell. But apparently it's a bit harder to get rid of this Norm Smith curse. So.
In fact, we might have made Norm Smith even angrier.
Yeah, just by invoking his name.
Yeah.
And if we win this week, then we'll expect Grapeviney to call in again next week.
Yeah, you might have just. That's why we haven't had callers the last few weeks. No one wants to get lumped with the expectation.
With the burden.
Yeah. All right, Grapeviney, thank you very much. Thank you, George,
Thanks, guys.
and
Thanks, guys.
Thank you to our loyal listeners. And give us. We'll be back. I think probably back to our regular days next week. We'll be back on a Tuesday after the Monday game. Hopefully, we have a win. Let's go, those Demons.
Come on,
Go Red Legs.
Come on, demons.